The contracts were stacked on the folding table. 6 signatures already. Helen's neighbors leaned over the paper, pens moving fast. The man from Consolidated Ag Solutions smiled like he'd done this 100 times before. "Mrs. Dvorak, you're the last holdout in this section," he said. "Sign today, and the check clears by Friday. $3,200 an acre. That's firm through end of business today." Helen looked at the contract, looked at her neighbors. Tom Briggs had already signed. The Hoffmans, the Kesslers, all of them watching her now. "No," she said. The room got quiet. "I'm sorry?" The man's smile didn't move. "I'm not selling." Tom Briggs laughed first. Not mean, just surprised. "Helen, that's almost $800,000 for 240 acres. You can't farm that land, not anymore." She didn't explain. She stood up. The man from Consolidated started talking about final offers and market conditions and limited windows. But she was already walking toward the door. Behind her, someone said, "She's got nothing but an old Farmall anyway." More laughter. She kept walking. The meeting had been at the community center on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, everyone in Grundy County knew she'd refused. By Wednesday, people were talking. At the co-op, Helen heard 2 men by the fertilizer display. "What's she gonna do, farm with that rusted-out 400? Thing hasn't run since Carter was president." She doesn't even own a planter anymore. Sold everything after Robert died. Bank's gonna take that land inside 2 years. Helen paid for her oil filter and left. The Farmall 400 sat in her machine shed under a blue tarp. She hadn't looked at it in weeks, hadn't thought about it. The tires were flat. The paint was faded. The engine hadn't turned over since 1979. It was the one thing she'd refused to sell when the equipment auction happened. The bank hadn't wanted it. Too old. Too small. Not worth the paperwork. Now, it was all she had. Consolidated moved fast. By the end of March, they'd closed on the 6 parcels around Helen's land. 1,200 acres total. They brought in crews, surveyors, heavy equipment. The Briggs place became a staging area. Trucks came and went. Soil samples. Test drilling. She watched from her kitchen window as the landscape around her changed ownership in ways she didn't fully understand yet. Tom Briggs stopped by one evening. Stood on her porch looking uncomfortable. "They're offering bonuses now," he said. "Paid me an extra $200 per acre just for helping recruit other sellers. If you come in now, there's still time." Time for what? "They're developing something. Big operation. Needs continuous acreage. Your 240 acres, it's right in the middle. They can't move forward until they secure it. Then, they can't move forward." Tom shook his head. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Maybe." He left. Helen went to the machine shed and pulled the tarp off the Farmall 400. It looked smaller than she remembered. April came. Helen needed to plant. The problem was she didn't own equipment anymore. Everything had been sold or repossessed after Robert died. The Farmall was all that remained, and the Farmall hadn't run in 4 years. She called Walter Klein, the neighbor who'd helped her before. Walter was gone now. Cancer. She called Ed Hruska. Ed had moved to town. His equipment was sold. She stood in the machine shed and looked at the 400. Red paint. Cream wheels. Engine stamped on the side. International Harvester logo barely visible through the dust. People in town were saying she'd lost her mind, saying grief had broken her judgment, saying she'd be gone by harvest. Helen didn't care what they were saying. She bought a battery, changed the oil, drained old gas that came out brown and thick, cleaned the carburetor with a wire brush and solvent. The work took 3 days. On the 4th day, she climbed into the seat. The starter ground. The engine coughed. Died. She tried again. This time it caught. Rough. Uneven. Then it smoothed out. The sound was higher pitched than modern diesels. Simpler. Older. But it ran. Planting took 5 weeks. Helen rented a 4-row planter from a farmer 20 miles south. Hitched it to the 400. The Farmall produced maybe 45 horsepower. Modern tractors ran 200, 300 horsepower. The difference was brutal. What a modern tractor could plant in 6 hours took Helen 2 days. She started at dawn, worked until dark. Came in covered in dust and diesel smell, hands blistered from the steering wheel. Her sons brought her sandwiches in the field. They were 15 and 11 now. Too young to help much. Old enough to see what was happening. "Mom, everyone says you should have sold," Michael said one evening. "I know what they say. Are we going to be okay?" Helen didn't answer right away. The 400 sat at the end of the row, engine idling, waiting. "We'll see," she said. By mid-May, all 240 acres were in. Corn and soybeans, conservative inputs, minimal fertilizer. She'd spent $4,200 on seed and chemicals. The 400 had burned maybe $120 worth of fuel during planting. Now, she waited. June brought the first crack in Consolidated's plan. Their operation was bigger than anyone realized. They weren't just buying land, they were building something. A massive hog confinement facility, processing center, feed mill, waste management system. The whole thing designed to run on continuous acreage with centralized logistics. But Helen's 240 acres sat right in the middle. The roads they needed to build went through her property, the water lines, the access routes. Without her land, everything had to be routed around. Costs doubled, timelines stretched. The man from Consolidated came back. Different approach this time. Friendly. Reasonable. "Mrs. Dvorak, I want to be frank with you. Your refusal is creating significant challenges for our project. I'm authorized to offer $4,500 per acre. That's well above market. That's over $1 million. No." "Can I ask why?" Helen didn't explain. She just said, "I'm not interested." He left. She could see the frustration now. 2 weeks later, Consolidated filed paperwork trying to claim eminent domain, agricultural development, public benefit, economic impact. The county denied it. Private company, private project. No legal grounds. Helen's land stayed hers. July. The crops looked decent. Helen spent the month cultivating. The 400 pulled a rented cultivator through the rows, controlling weeds, slow work, long days. Tom Briggs stopped by again. This time he wasn't friendly. "You're costing people jobs," he said. "Consolidated's talking about scaling back because they can't make the logistics work. That's employment. That's tax base. All because you won't be reasonable." "I'm farming," Helen said. "Same as I've always done." With a tractor from the Eisenhower administration. "You think that makes you some kind of hero?" She didn't answer. Tom left angry. But something was shifting. Helen could feel it. The pressure was coming from a different direction now. August. Harvest started creeping closer. Consolidated's construction was behind schedule. Way behind. The routing issues around Helen's property had created bottlenecks. Equipment couldn't get where it needed to go. Deliveries were delayed. Contractors were frustrated. Then the real problem hit. The Briggs place flooded. Not the house, the fields. A drainage issue related to the new construction. Water pooled in low spots. Consolidated's crew tried to fix it, but they'd altered the natural drainage when they put in access roads. The water had nowhere to go. Tom needed to plant a cover crop, fast, to prevent erosion and meet his lease obligations with Consolidated. But his big equipment couldn't get into the field. Too heavy, too wide. It would just sink and make things worse. He needed something small, something light, something old enough that it wouldn't bog down in soft ground. He needed the Farmall 400. Helen's phone rang on a Thursday evening. "Helen, it's Tom." His voice was different, quieter. "I need to ask you something." "So?" She didn't make him beg, didn't gloat, just said, When do you need it? Tomorrow morning, if possible. I can bring it over at 7. There was silence on the line. Then Tom said, I'll pay you. Whatever's fair. We'll figure it out. The next morning, Helen drove the 400 over to the Briggs place. Tom met her at the field. The ground was soft, saturated. His Case IH tractor sat at the edge, useless, too heavy to risk. Helen drove the 400 into the field. The narrow tires distributed weight differently. Old technology, simple design. It didn't sink. She spent the next 6 hours planting cover crop, back and forth across the wet ground, while Tom's modern equipment sat idle. When she finished, Tom handed her $300 cash. She took it without comment, drove the 400 home. That evening, her phone rang 3 more times. Harvest hit in October. Helen rented a combine from a custom operator. Her corn averaged 89 bushels per acre. Below county average, but respectable given her minimal inputs. Soybeans did better. 37 bushels per acre. The real story wasn't her yields. The real story was that Consolidated's project had become a logistical nightmare. Everything was behind schedule. Everything cost more than projected. The routing issues around Helen's land meant equipment was constantly being redirected. Delays cascaded. Contractors threatened to walk. And then the custom operators got booked up. This was the thing nobody had predicted. Consolidated had purchased 1,200 acres. They'd contracted with local farmers to manage some of the crop production, but they didn't own equipment. They were relying on custom operators and rental services. Every custom operator in 3 counties was already booked. Harvest waits for no one. If you miss your window, you lose your crop. The farmers working Consolidated's leased parcels started panicking. They had tight deadlines, financial penalties if they didn't deliver, and no equipment available. Helen's phone started ringing. Not just neighbors now, contractors, farmers from 2 counties over, people she'd never met, all of them asking the same question. Do you have equipment available? The Farmall 400 couldn't harvest, but it could do other things. It could haul grain carts, could pull wagons, could move equipment, could work in places modern tractors couldn't access because of ground conditions or tight spaces. Helen started saying yes. She worked 17-hour days that October. The 400 ran constantly. She hauled grain from fields where big tractors couldn't navigate the soft edges. She pulled equipment trailers for contractors who couldn't get their trucks into tight farm lanes. She did fieldwork that wasn't profitable for big operations, but critical for meeting deadlines, and she charged for it. Not much. $75 an hour. Enough to cover fuel and wear. Enough to matter. People paid. They had no choice. The alternative was missing harvest windows and losing money. A 70-year-old Farmall was suddenly worth its weight in gold because it could do things efficiently that modern equipment couldn't do at all. By November, Helen had earned $8,400 in custom work. Her crop netted another $5,200. Total income for the year, $13,600. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than she'd made in 3 years. And the 400 never missed a day. Winter. The Consolidated project was officially delayed, 9 months behind schedule. Costs had overrun by 40%. The CEO put out a statement blaming unforeseen logistical challenges and regional infrastructure limitations. What he meant was, one woman with 240 acres in the middle of their project had broken their entire plan. The local paper ran a story. Someone had leaked internal documents showing Consolidated had budgeted $200,000 in contingency costs for routing around Helen's property. Actual costs were over $900,000 and climbing. The reporter called Helen for comment. She declined to speak. In January, the man from Consolidated came back. 3rd visit. He didn't sit down this time, just stood on her porch looking tired. Name your price, he said. I'm not selling. $6,000 per acre. Final offer. No. He stared at her, trying to understand, trying to find the angle. What do you want? Nothing from you." He left. Helen watched his truck disappear down the county road. The Farmall 400 sat in the machine shed, ready for spring. February brought something unexpected. Consolidated announced a revised approach. They weren't abandoning the project, but they were restructuring it. Smaller scale, modular design, working with existing land configurations instead of requiring continuous acreage. They didn't say it explicitly, but everyone understood. They'd given up on acquiring Helen's land. The farmers who'd sold to Consolidated started realizing what that meant. Their leases were still valid, but the big operation they'd been promised, the premium prices, the guaranteed markets, the steady income, that was gone. They were farming for a company that was now scrambling to make the numbers work. And their equipment had been sold when the Sky. Buyout. Most of them had sold everything. They'd been told Consolidated would provide equipment or that lease terms would cover rentals. Rentals were expensive. Consolidated was starting to cut corners. Tom Briggs showed up at Helen's door in March. He didn't come inside, just stood there looking at his boots. "I made a mistake," he said. Helen didn't respond. "I sold everything. House, land, equipment. Thought I was getting out clean. Setting myself up. Now, I'm farming 480 acres on a lease. And I don't own a single piece of equipment. I'm paying rental rates that are eating me alive. What are you asking? Can I hire you? For the season. Planting? Maybe cultivation? Whatever you can help with." Helen thought about it. Not long. Just enough to let him stand there feeling what he felt. "Same rate I charged last fall, $75 an hour, plus fuel." "That's fair. I'll need payment up front for the first 40 hours. Tom nodded, pulled out his checkbook right there on the porch, wrote the check, handed it to her. "When can you start?" he asked. "Next week." Spring 1984. Helen planted her 240 acres first, then she hired out. The Farmall 400 worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Planting, cultivating, hauling. Odd jobs that big operations didn't want to bother with, but that smaller farmers desperately needed. She hired her oldest son, Michael, now 16, to help. Taught him to drive the 400. Taught him to maintain it. Change oil. Check fluids. Grease fittings. The skills that kept old equipment running. By June, Helen had 17 contracts. Farmers who'd sold their equipment and were now scrambling. Consolidated contractors who needed backup options. Small operators who couldn't afford modern iron but could afford to rent a Farmall by the hour. The 400 became famous. Not in a Hollywood way, in a rural way. People started calling it the only tractor that's never late. It showed up when you needed it. It worked. It didn't break. Modern tractors were faster, more powerful, more comfortable. But they were also finicky. Computer systems, emissions controls, hydraulic complexity. When they broke, they stayed broken until a dealer technician could get there. Sometimes that meant days. The 400 didn't break. And when it needed something, Helen fixed it herself with hand tools and parts she ordered from salvage yards. Simple machines have an advantage nobody remembers until complexity fails. By August, something strange had happened. The people who'd laughed at Helen's refusal weren't laughing anymore. Some of them were working for her, paying her, depending on her. The Farmall 400 had become essential infrastructure, not because it was the best, because it was available, reliable, functional, and not leveraged to anyone. Tom Briggs was farming on a lease with shrinking margins. The Hoffmans had taken Consolidated's money and reinvested it poorly. The Kesslers were working at the co-op now. Land gone. Helen still owned 240 acres, debt-free. Still drove a 1954 Farmall that owed nothing to any bank. The economics had flipped. The people who'd sold for security were now exposed. The person who'd refused was now secure. One evening, Helen sat at her kitchen table and looked at her books. Income from custom work, $31,200. Income from her own crop, $6,800. Total, $38,000. She'd survived on $13,600 the year before. This year, she was going to clear Almost 3 times that, and the 400 was still running. Consolidated tried one more time in September. Different person, different approach. The new representative was a woman about Helen's age, professional, direct. Mrs. Dvorak, I'm not here to pressure you. I just want to understand. What would it take? Helen looked at her. There's nothing to understand. I'm not selling. Can I ask why? Because this is my land, my equipment, my work. I'm not interested in letting someone else control that. The woman nodded slowly. You know you could name any price at this point. The company would pay. You've cost them over $1 million in delays. Then they shouldn't have designed a project that required my land. The woman almost smiled. Almost. You're going to win this, aren't you? I'm not trying to win. I'm just farming. The woman left. Consolidated never contacted Helen again. Harvest that fall was smooth. Helen's crops were modest but consistent. Her custom work continued through October. By the time snow fell in November, the Farmall 400 had logged over 800 hours of operation. More than most modern tractors do in 2 years. Helen changed the oil, replaced filters, greased every fitting. The tractor sat in the machine shed, ready for spring, looking exactly like it had looked in 1954. Red paint, cream wheels, simple, mechanical, functional. Her neighbors drove past her place now with different thoughts, some of them with envy, some with regret, a few with respect. Tom Briggs stopped by one last time in December. Didn't ask for anything. Just stood in her driveway and said, I should have kept my land. Helen didn't tell him he was right. Didn't lecture him. Just said, probably. He nodded and left. 1985 started quiet. Consolidated's project limped forward at reduced scale. The farmers who'd sold were locked into leases with declining terms. The ones who'd kept their land were farming carefully, having learned something expensive about debt and leverage. Helen's phone still rang. People still needed the 400. She still said yes when it made sense. Still charged her rate. Still did the work. One afternoon in March, a reporter from the Des Moines Register showed up. Wanted to write a story about the farmer who said no. Helen declined the interview. The reporter left disappointed. She didn't need validation. Didn't need attention. She'd refused because it was the only choice that made sense to her. The 400 had worked because old equipment, maintained properly, still works. That wasn't a moral lesson. It was just mechanical fact. But the people who'd laughed had learned something. They'd learned that modern doesn't always mean better. That bigger doesn't guarantee survival. That debt is a tool until it becomes a trap. Most of all, they'd learned that when you refuse to move, sometimes the world has to move around you. Helen didn't say any of this out loud. She just started the Farmall, drove it to the field, and went to work. Behind her, the machine shed door stayed open. The 400's exhaust hung in the cold air, visible for a moment, then gone. Simple machines, simple work, simple choice. They'd laughed when she refused. Then the Farmall went to work. If stories like this still matter to you, stories about holding ground, about refusing pressure, about old equipment that keeps running when everything modern fails, then maybe you understand why some choices can't be measured in dollars. Maybe you've seen what happens when people sell what can't be bought back. Or maybe you've just learned that sometimes the slowest machine wins because it never stops moving. The Farmall 400 still runs. Helen still farms. And the people who laughed first lost their leverage long before she lost hers.